Very good evening to you all. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a wonderful turn-up for a very special occasion. Many thanks to Bob and to the Rooty Hill Naval Association for hosting this year's special presentation on the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Long Tan. They have supported this particular memorial dinner for the last 11 years, and tonight is no exception. It is now that time of the evening, folks, when we enter a more sombre and reflective mood. It is a time we cast our minds back to an afternoon in August of 1966, when a ferocious battle took place in a rubber plantation in the South Vietnamese province of Phuoc Toi. This battle involved a lone rifle company from D Company, 6th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment. It was pitted against a very formidable enemy force, massively superior in number. Australian soldiers fought in many intense actions during the period of our 12-year involvement in South Vietnam, but none were as intense or dramatic as the Battle of Long Tan in a rubber plantation on the 18th of August 1966. An isolated infantry company of 108 men were cut off, and they were outnumbered by at least 20 to 1. Unbelievable odds. They withstood massed North Vietnamese army attacks for nearly 3 hours. D Company, 6 RAR, were to suffer the heaviest casualties of any single engagement during the Vietnam War. They prevailed, however, against all odds, and their valiant stand became a defining action of the Vietnam War. The question has often been raised, why does the Battle of Long Tan hold such a high profile when there were so many other heroic battles involving Australian and New Zealand soldiers? In each of these battles, the heroism, mateship and professionalism of the Australian and New Zealand soldiers was always a telling difference. The high profile afforded the Battle of Long Tan in no way detracts or lessens the performance of other regiments who were involved in battles and, sadly, loss of life. Perhaps the answer to this question lies in the word pivotal. The Battle of Long Tan was a turning point in the Phuoc Toi province, where the D445 Viet Cong Regiment held sway. They were a very aggressive and formidable force. The true strategic value of this battle was not learnt until later, when it was realised that D445 was so decimated that it could not continue the fight to the Australians in the ensuing 6 years. It also basically destroyed the 275 North Vietnamese Army Regiment. They had not only lost their resolve to fight, but were a mere shadow of their former dominance in the Phuoc Toi province. It is now my privilege, ladies and gentlemen, to present to you the story of D Company, 6th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment at the Battle of Ong Tan. A mortar and recoilless rocket fire attack on the Nui Dat Task Force base on the early morning of 17th of August 1966, leaving 24 Australians wounded, prompted an immediate artillery response, and at dawn a rifle company of 6 RAR was dispatched. B Company located the mortar positions but encountered no enemy activity. At 11 a.m, D Company, 6 RAR under the command of Major Harry Smith, departed Nui Dat, relieving B Company at about 1 p.m. on the fringe of the Long Tan rubber plantation. B Company then turned back to Nui Dat with the intention of enjoying the Cold Joy concert, which was just about to start. They did not, however, make it back to base, but were to later rejoin D Company on the battlefield just near dusk. D Company entered the rubber plantation at about 3 p.m. to search eastwards. Major Smith recalled, not expecting action, but nonetheless had his platoon set out widely dispersed and alert to any possible enemy activity. What Major Smith and his men were unaware of was that the 547 signal troop had been monitoring radio transmissions of the NVA 275 regiment for the past 2 weeks. Tracking indicated the radio, and with it the main enemy force formation, was approaching Nui Dat from the east, advancing at approximately 1 kilometre each day. These transmissions abruptly ceased on the 14th of August. The location at the time of cessation of transmissions was only 5,000 metres east of the Nui Dat Task Force base. D Company was now patrolling directly towards this very area. At around 3:40 p.m, 11 Platoon had an initial fleeting contact with 6 or 7 enemy, and on following up the contact, they came under fire from a large enemy main force regiment. 11 Platoon was almost surrounded and pinned down by heavy RPG and automatic weapons fire. At about this time, the heavens opened and the battle continued through a torrential downpour. Within 20 minutes, 11 Platoon Commander, 2nd Lieutenant Gordon Cameron Sharp was killed, the command being immediately assumed by Sergeant Bob Buick. Nearly 1/3 of his 28-man platoon were either killed or wounded during this initial period. The survivors were forced to pull back and eventually rejoin 11 and 12 Platoon, which were also coming under heavy enemy fire. They were endeavouring to manoeuvre to counter enemy flanking movements. The dispersed platoons called in artillery support, but unfortunately, due to damaged radios, they had to wait until one soldier ran forward under extremely heavy enemy fire with a spare radio. 6 gun crews of 161st New Zealand Artillery responded, temporarily hindering the enemy advance, but they were soon to be joined by 12 more guns from the 2 Australian batteries. Major Smith organised his platoons into a defensive perimeter around company headquarters. They were to withstand massed human wave assaults for nearly 3 hours, but held firm, taking a steady toll on the enemy. At 4:26 p.m, D Company's situation was becoming increasingly desperate by the minute. In imminent danger of being overrun and indeed annihilated, New Zealand Forward Artillery Observer Captain Maurice Stanley radioed the order, Fire Mission Regiment. The gun line at Nui Dat, some 5 kilometres distance, erupted. 161st New Zealand Battery was now being joined by the 103rd and 105th Australian Batteries and the 2nd 35th United States Howitzer Battalion. Under the masterful command of Captain Stanley, the combined power of 24 howitzers unleashed a massive and devastating bombardment which was to continue for nearly 3 hours. At times, Captain Stanley, lying in torrential rain and wiping mud from his field map, would send adjustments and corrections to the gun line, bringing artillery fire in danger close to within 15 metres of D Company's defensive position. And that is how desperate and grim things had become for the remaining survivors of the company. The continual thump on the gun line alerted all at Nui Dat that this was something big. Their mates out there at the rubber plantation were in deep trouble. A flight of Chinook helicopters was immediately dispatched from Vung Tau, carrying pallet loads of howitzer shells. These were dropped in the ammunition dump, and volunteers from everywhere, cooks, clerks, infantry, whoever was there, would carry as many shells as they could. Bearing in mind, at this time, there was massive lightning strikes, knee-deep mud and torrential rain. Most of them were, I think, praying to God that they weren't going to be struck by lightning. At no time during the 3 hours did any gun have to cease firing due to an ammunition shortage. On the gun line, chronically fatigued gunners from the previous night's bombardment were physically ill, overcome by toxic cordite fumes. This did not, however, deter them from their critical roles. After all, they fully realised the very survival of their mates out of the rubber plantation rested squarely on their shoulders. Artillery ammunition expended during this 3-hour period amounted to nearly 3,500 rounds. Several days after D Company's return to Nui Dat Task Force Base, Sergeant Bob Buick went over to a gun emplacement, approached a gunner, held his hand out and said 2 words, "Thanks, mate." That said it all. At 5:02 p.m, critically low on ammunition, Major Harry Smith radioed for an urgent ammunition resupply. At 6 p.m, with artillery fire briefly halted, 2 Iroquois helicopters from No. 9 Squadron RAAF flew one of the most amazing and daring missions imaginable. In atrocious weather, the prospect of enemy ground fire and flying and hovering at treetop level, guided only by red smoke barely breaking through the cloud canopy, the critical supplies were dropped nearly in the lap of Company Sergeant Major Warrant Officer Big Jack Kirby. It was Jack who immediately handled the distribution of the ammunition. By 6... Excuse me. By 6:10 p.m, D Company had reformed, but was still very much in danger of being overrun. With daylight fading, D Company radioed base. Enemy could be reorganising to attack. 2 platoons are about 75% effective One platoon is all but destroyed. Annihilation seemed imminent, but just before 7 p.m, 10 armoured personnel carriers from 3rd Troop, 1st Armoured Personnel Carrier Squadron carrying A Company reinforcements crashed into the flank of the Viet Cong, taking them totally by surprise. B Company 6 RAR entered the scene at the same time. The cavalry, together with A and B Company, broke the enemy's will to fight, forcing them to flee into the night. At 7:15 p.m. the battle ended and the monsoonal storm abated as quickly as both had begun. A landing zone was established by the cavalry, with the evacuation of all casualties by 7 Iroquois helicopters completed just after midnight. At first light on the 19th of August 1966, a combined force of infantry and armoured personnel carriers re-entered the battlefield to conduct a thorough clearance. For the men of D Company, this was a particularly harrowing experience. The rubber plantation was a scene of utter carnage and devastation. The bodies of their mates were found lying in their firing positions, still facing towards the enemy, but eerily washed clean by overnight rain. Amid this very sombre scene, soldiers were elated to find 2 of their mates previously reported missing in action, and although very badly wounded, they had somehow managed to survive overnight on the battlefield. The grisly task of counting their many dead was halted at 245. They were buried where they lay in shallow graves. After all, they were all soldiers doing their sworn duty. The bravery, tenacity and sacrifice of Australian and New Zealand soldiers at Long Tan was duly celebrated. They had won a legendary victory against a formidable and massively superior numerical task. D Company 6 RAR was awarded United States Presidential Unit Citation, one of only 3 ever awarded to an Australian unit. A further 15 Commonwealth decorations were awarded to individual soldiers for their actions during this battle. Today, veterans of D Company 6 RAR guard the memory of their unit's bravery and sacrifice on the 18th of August 1966. The survivors among the original Anzacs who landed at Gallipoli on the 25th of April 1915 did exactly the same. Just as Anzac Day has grown in significance to become Australia's de facto national day, so too has Long Tan Day become far more inclusive. On Vietnam Veterans Day, the recalling of a single battle on one afternoon in August of 1966 now commemorates all Australians who took part in that long and often divisive conflict. Professionalism, raw courage, daring, discipline and mateship interspersed with a degree of humour and larrikinism. These are the exquisite fibres comprising a very special and unique steely fabric, initially woven on the shores of Gallipoli by our original Anzacs. For nearly a century, this very special fabric has been constantly withstood the heat of battle and test of time. It has often been bloodied, but never bowed. This is the very fabric of the Australian and New Zealand soldier, which clearly defines them as consummate warriors. This very special fabric was once again much in evidence at the Battle of Longtown on the 18th of August 1966. Yet again, it was bloodied, but withstood the heat of battle, and above all else, did not bow. In the beginning, they were mates. In the heat of battle, they were brothers. They lie in hallowed ground, in cemeteries now throughout Australia, but they shall forever remain brothers at eternal rest. Lest we forget. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for seeing such a wonderful audience. Sorry, mate. What's straight away?
Could we have everyone up standing for the roll call? Thank you. On the screens you can follow the roll call as the pictures displayed.
I now have the privilege of reading the roll of honour of those who paid the supreme sacrifice at the Battle of Longtown on the 18th of August 1966. Second Lieutenant Gordon Cameron Sharp, National Serviceman, aged 21 years. Private Richard Alfred Aldersey, Regular Army, aged 20 years. Corporal Peter Edward Clements, 3 Troop 1st Armoured Personnel Carrier Squadron, aged 21 years. Private Glenn Alfred Gravel, National Serviceman, aged 21 years. Private Kenneth Howard Gant, National Serviceman, aged 21 years. Private Ernest Francis Grant, Regular Army, aged 20. Private Victor Roy Grice, National Serviceman, aged 21 years. Private James Michael Houston, Regular Army, aged 22 years. Lance Corporal Jack Jury, National Serviceman, aged 21 years. Private Paul Andrew Large, National Serviceman, aged 22 years. Private Albert Frederick McCormick, National Serviceman, aged 21 years. Private Dennis James McCormick, National Serviceman, aged 21 years. Private Warren David Mitchell, National Serviceman, aged 21 years. Private Douglas Javing Salvaron, National Serviceman, aged 21 years. Private David John Thomas, Regular Army, aged 21 years. Private Francis Brett Top, Regular Army, aged 19 years. Private Maxwell Ray Wales, Regular Army, aged 22 years. And Private Colin Joseph Whiston, National Service, aged 21 years. May they forever rest in peace. Brothers in battle, they shall forever remain brothers at eternal rest. Thank you very much.
while you're all upstanding, we'll have a quiet poppy laying ceremony. I'd like to call on Rita and Terry Ryan to come and place the poppy on the remembrance table. Thank you. Then followed by anyone from other tables which have got the 2 poppies on there to come and do the same. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If you keep up standing, please. I'd ask the sound person to do our last post. Thank you.
They shall grow not old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.